What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back in some more Trove, and today we're going to be doing another guide for returning players in Trove. So there's been a lot of things that have changed with Trove throughout the years. So this could be a lengthy video, it could be a short video. Honestly speaking, I'm kind of just going to go off the top of my head and try to explain the biggest points of interest that I think new players or old school players are going to end up wanting to know about. Now, something that ended up happening a few years ago, just internally with Trove, is that we ended up having the Trion Worlds company. They went bankrupt, and since then Gamigo ended up taking charge. They ended up buying out all of the assets of Trion Worlds, and so what that means is that we've got a completely different publisher and completely different set of developers that are behind Trove now. So as far as I know, everybody ended up getting moved out. I don't think we have any of the old school developers, but maybe we do. I don't know. But what does this mean? Well, what it means is that we've got new rules in place. So we've got a new set of developers and a new company that's in charge of it, which means good things. Thank God, because there was a really scary point where when Trove ended up getting acquisitioned by Gamigo, that players were actually really worried. Is this the downfall? Is this when it goes belly up? You know, because Gamigo is infamous for the fact that they end up making games very pay to win, very cash up oriented, and they also end up moving on from games that they have under their belt when they are no longer profitable, which thankfully Trove has not only been very profitable for them, that they're going to keep developing it, but we also have some of the best updates Trove has ever seen. It took a few years before Gamigo started to pick up some steam and, get everything acquisitioned properly, but now we've started to have consistently game-changing updates. The most recent one being the Sunrise update, which is going to end up being quite significant and adds crystal gems to the game. Now, let's talk, let's break down some of the early game stuff that you guys might be wondering about. What happened to Shadow Towers? Shadow Towers have basically been moved from the game. This already ended up happening a long time ago in favor of a new area called the Delves, which is essentially going to end up being an area that you can end up playing publicly with people, or you can craft a portal in order to end up going into it. And it's going to end up being a really boring place. Nobody really likes it. I think people enjoy it when they first go to it, but then further on than that, it gets really annoying. But that's going to end up being this building right here, and it's going to end up being very similar to the Geode Caves. But the point is that the Delves are basically going to end up being the Geode Caves refurbished, but with combat. Now, how do these end up working, and how are they different than Shadow Towers? Well, for one, they're really ugly. They're just random generated caves that basically have certain amounts of cells or rooms that'll generate connecting, intertwined to one another. And usually you'll go into the Delves, you gotta complete an objective, and then you complete a boss. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is that the Delves are very useful for getting XP, because you end up actually completing multiple objectives per floor. And the whole thing about the Delves is that they're infinite. Technically, obviously they're going to end up scaling and getting more and more difficult, but that's why they were kind of the replacement for the Shadow Tower, because what Gamigo was trying to do, and what the game was trying to do by adding the Delves to the game, is they wanted to move away from everybody crafting tons and tons of Shadow Tower portals and opening tons and tons of instances for Shadow Tower portals. Somebody just got Ganda, GG. Because of the lag that it was causing towards the server. And Delves definitely helped a lot with that, because by having an infinite, dungeon, essentially, or infinite caves, it meant that players would end up staying in that instance for a longer period of time, rather than constantly creating new ones and stressing the servers. Okay? So the last thing is that all of the resources from Shadow Tower, including the bosses, Shadow Towers does still exist. You can fight the bosses in the Shadow Tower. You won't be able to do the dungeons anymore. But Delves is now where you'll end up getting Lunar Souls, Divine Divinity, and so on and so forth. All of the main Shadow Tower resources are basically thrown into the Delves, but that's not really super duper important. The Delves is like just kind of an area that I feel a lot of people from old school Trove are probably still really confused about, because everybody wants the Shadow Towers back. Frankly speaking, I don't really care about the Shadow Towers one way or another, but I certainly do not like the Delves. Like, it's pretty bad. Now, another thing you might notice is if we open up the character screen here, you might have seen a few few classes that you don't recognize. So over the past couple years, you know, we ended up having the Vanguard, I think was in like 2018 or something. My God, what a long time ago. But more recently, we ended up having the Bard class added to the game, which I've got plenty of videos talking about the Bard in more detail if you want to know about him. He's going to end up being a weirdo class where you basically are going to be, you know, using your ultimate ability to have songs, and then you keep a chain of attacks that the game is going to tell you to do in order to end up making those songs stronger and giving you various buffs. And then more recently in the Sunrise update, which currently isn't out on console but should be coming hopefully in July. The only confirmation we have is summer 2022, so okay. But we've got the Solarion added with this update, which is going to end up being the new bow class that we're going to end up having plenty of videos talking about as well. But before we get into that, if we are talking about the Delves, it means that we do also have to talk about Geode Topside. So Geode Topside is going to end up being, for the longest time, it's the end game area. You know, if you weren't going into the Delves, you were going here into the Geode Surface. And I've got mods that make this place look pretty and everything, because otherwise it's a disgusting red color, and I don't know why the devs never changed it, because it literally makes my eyes bleed. Literally or figuratively. Anyways, the point is that this area is going to end up having dungeons really, really close by to one another, and it also introduces 5-star dungeons, which you can actually see one right over here. A 5-star dungeon is essentially going to end up being a big boy version of a 3-star dungeon, but it's also going to end up giving you different resources. So you'll end up getting more resources out of here that are going to end up being used in order to craft crystal gear. So crystal gear is obtained on the Geode Surface, and there's going to end up being multiple difficulties. So at U8 difficulty, you can get crystal 1 gear, U9 you can get crystal 2, U10 you can get crystal 3, and now with U11 being added to the game, we can get crystal 4. Crystal 4 gear has been in the game since the Delves. It's actually been only obtainable in the Delves up until this recent update, which is awesome. But it's pretty atrocious because you gotta be in U11, which is really, really difficult, and you gotta be able to end up handling 5-star dungeons specifically. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get into that momentarily. Now, another thing we gotta mention while we're here on the Geode Surface is that you can also very rarely end up finding a tiny little marker on the map, which again, ignore my mini map, where it'll end up looking like a tentacle, and there's going to end up being a Leviathan, which is basically going to end up being the strongest enemy that you can fight in the game. There is going to end up being a version of U8, U9, and U10 Leviathan. At U11, for some dumb reason, it can just spawn any of the Leviathans. But the main reason why you want to fight Leviathans, you can end up getting a torch. So there's going to end up being this banner slot in the game. And the torches will end up giving you the light stat, which is also going to end up being on all of the crystal gear. So let's just take a look at the torches right here. So these are going to end up being the torches that you commonly get from Leviathans, which are temporary. They're going to disappear after the daily reset, basically, right? But you can end up getting 3 of these by fighting 3 different Leviathans, and then you can craft it into a weekly torch, which will end up lasting for until the weekly reset. Now, very, very rarely you can get what we call a permatorch, which is a permanent torch, which quite literally is exactly what it says. It's going to end up giving you the highest stats in the game that you can end up having as a banner on your character, and then you can end up essentially even crafting that into higher tiered torches, which will end up giving you even more additional stats. Now, what is the light stat? Now, that's going to end up being something really important that I should have probably covered a little bit earlier, but essentially Delves, as well as Geode Surface, and now with this most recent update, U10 and U11 of all Uber worlds, light is essentially armor penetration, because the enemies have a darkness stat that we as players don't end up having. There's like one ally that has it, but it doesn't do anything. You can consider the darkness stat to be an armor value stat. So what they end up doing to scale us down for the endgame areas is they essentially make it so that the enemies will naturally negate a certain percentage of our damage. And so the higher our light value, the more of our natural true damage ends up going through towards the enemy. So that's where the banners and new allies that give you light stats and so on and so forth, and crystal gear, which gives you light stats, is going to end up being really, really important, because there's also going to end up being cosmic gems. Cosmic gems are only obtained in this area as well. in the Geode Surface. They did in the Sunrise update finally add, you know, we can finally go to Prime Uber Worlds again, but I don't know whether or not they added cosmic gems to the drop tables of Prime Uber World boxes, because it includes like fire, air, and water, but I don't know whether or not it ends up including cosmic gems, just because frankly speaking I haven't farmed Prime Uber Worlds for years until this update, frankly speaking, so my knowledge of it is a little bit lacking. But the other huge thing that I want to mention is that we've steadily had reworks to a lot of the classes in the game. There's only maybe like 2 or 3 classes in the game right now that I would not recommend you to play, but generally speaking, you can end up maining whatever class that you want across the board. It's just some of them might be more efficient than others in certain specific areas and stuff. You know, we've got plenty of videos covering all of that. But my point is that more recently, we ended up finally getting the Shadowhunter rework update, which ended up also changing the stats of a lot of classes in preparation for U11 difficulty to be added to the game. And with this newest update, we also have crystal gems added to the game. So crystal gems, quite literally, I don't have any right now because I'm still in the process of recording a bunch of different videos and so on and so forth. You will be able to upgrade your gems to crystal so long as you have a crystal gem converter, which you can either craft for a ridiculous amount of in-game resources. You can get one from the cash shop for a ridiculous amount of qubits. The point is that if you have a stellar gem at level 25, you can upgrade it into crystal. However, you can still get crystal gems as a drop as well, but they're exclusive to U11. And frankly speaking, U11 is ridiculously powerful. It's really, really difficult. So even though 30k PR is required in order to enter U11, you are not going to be strong enough to solo U11 at 30k PR. Now with it, it does mean that the Everdark has slightly changed, because for the longest time, the Everdark was absolutely useless at U9 because it didn't end up having any difference between U8 and U9. Still doesn't right now until they end up fixing it. I'm assuming it's a bug. But essentially U8 is supposed to only drop stellar class gems, and then U9 is supposed to be able to drop stellar and crystal class gems. But as of right now, at the moment that I'm recording this anyways, U8 and U9 have absolutely no difference. Frankly speaking, I think they should just get rid of U9 anyways, just because whatever. Like, the patch notes mentions that U8 can have radiant and stellar class gems, but I think that the devs forgot that there is no such thing as a radiant class gem. That was actually something that they rectified a long time ago. And I really, really hope that they don't end up considering re-adding radiant class gems, because that would be atrocious. But my point is that U8 can have stellar and crystal, whereas U9 can have stellar and crystal, and it doesn't end up increasing the odds or anything like that. So you may as well just end up going to U8 after all. Now with the latest update, we also have a new biome type that's been added to the game, which is pretty cool. Generally speaking, it's going to end up reusing a lot of assets from other areas. More particularly, those of you that know Radiant Skyland are just going to end up immediately recognizing that it's going to end up being the exact same. However, a lot of the structures and dungeons here are going to end up being unique to this biome, including new enemies and so on and so forth, and tons of weird debuffs that you'll end up having while you're in this biome as well. Like, you can see this one going off on my screen constantly, where we basically will end up having a fast falling effect with our wings. However, these wings that I have right now end up negating the effect, but the point is that they don't want you flying here. And there's going to end up being various NPCs that you can end up interacting with, which will end up essentially giving you, they can negate that effect. They can give you a buff towards your damage, give you a buff towards defense, because the enemies here are also going to be really, really high scaled because of the fact that they've got so many nerfs towards the player themselves. But generally speaking, it's all temporary buffs, and it's very, very overpriced, so there's no reason why anyone should end up doing it. Now, the big key difference with this biome is that there's going to end up being all these dungeons up here and different resources and stuff, but the new area is going to be down here. So this is going to be the Ashen biome. We essentially got 2 biomes in one, because there's a whole bunch of different resources and different dungeons that you can end up obtaining down here, and you're going to need all of them in order to end up leveling up your crystal gems and crafting the Solarion and stuff. Not that you want to end up necessarily crafting him, because he's just ridiculously expensive, but you can see from down here it actually looks pretty dang cool, man. Like, I really enjoy this biome, despite the fact that it's just so overpowered I barely find myself farming here. However, You can also notice on the map that we've got up and down arrows. That's pertaining to where the location of the dungeon is. So you can see there's a down arrow pointing to this, and then there's an up arrow pointing to this. You'll have to excuse my mini map, and a lot of the small visual things that you're seeing on screen are mods. So you might be like, oh, what's this weird arrow thing? What's with the mini map? That it's just mods, okay? It's not like they ended up adding a mini map to the game vanilla or anything like that. However, this ugly thing on the HUD right here is actually related to the Solarion class. But anyways, speaking of those 5-star dungeons that I mentioned in the Geode Surface and how they can end up dropping C4 gear at U11, this new biome actually has 5-star dungeons generate in U10 and U11 as well. This is going to end up being a new type of 5-star dungeon, because the 5-star dungeons in Geode Surface essentially are just a bigger 3-star dungeon. You go in, you complete it within a time limit. Hopefully you're within the time limit. You get a bunch of rewards that, again, you will end up using to upgrade your crystal gear. However, these 5-star dungeons that are located in this biome are going to end up having new resources, obviously going to be relating most of all to the Solarion, the new mounts and allies and junk like that that you can end up crafting at the new crafting table. You know how Trove is at this point. They basically end up adding a new update, and they add a whole bunch of new resources so that endgame freaks like me can't get prepared for the update, and thus it drags out the content so that they can continue to develop the next tier of content, right? But the difference with these 5-star dungeons is that they technically are infinite. It's a very similar mechanic to the delves in that you will be able to keep repeating them so long as you're fast enough at completing all of the objectives in this dungeon, that you can end up going to the next wave, to the next wave, to the next wave, and so on and so forth, right? And unfortunately, the devs they kind of messed up with them. I really hope that they rectify it, but frankly speaking, I don't think that they will. The new 5-star dungeons kind of suck, and they're very, very poorly designed in their mechanics. So I really, really like the idea of an infinite dungeon, and I think that the new 5 stars are a lot of fun. But you actually gain less and less resources and less rewards the longer you're at that 5-star dungeon. So it's kind of self-defeating in that sense, and makes it so that you don't actually want to end up staying at those dungeons, because you get less items that you can end up loot collecting and so on and so forth as you end up going further and further into the waves of completing the dungeon. So usually I end up recommending you go to like wave 23 or something like that, because the waves will end up spawning a unique boss every prime number wave that you're on. This is a graph of what prime numbers are. I don't know why the devs are obsessed with prime numbers. Seriously, change it, remove it, make it so that the 5-star dungeons literally spawn this unique boss every 5 floors or something. Speaking of why we keep teasing the fact that they're obsessed with prime numbers, we've got something very important that I didn't mention, which is Paragon Levels, which goes hand in hand with crystal rings. Yes, that's right. And crystal rings are going to end up having hidden effects, which is going to end up being a temporary ability that you can end up obtaining by applying a polish to your crystal ring that will end up then giving you an ability that could completely change how the class works. It's kind of like a class gem ability, but it's temporary, and some of them suck. But the point, I'm getting ahead of myself. So what are Paragon levels? Well, you'll notice that my Solarion is looking pretty swag, but in the top left, you'll notice that it says I'm level 0. So what a Paragon level is once you get a class to level 30, that's when the real game begins. That's when you have your classes basically maxed out, but any XP that you obtain from that point on will go towards Paragon levels. Paragon levels don't give you stats or anything like that. What they do is every few Paragon levels, you'll end up gaining various resources for reaching certain tiers. And the Paragon levels are also based on prime numbers for some stupid reason. So what that means is that the further you get in your Paragon levels, similar to the 5 stars, you have diminishing returns. It gets worse and worse and worse rewards because you get them a lot less the higher your Paragon level. And Paragon levels go up to like 1,000 before they roll back over. So yeah, kind of sucks. Again, I think that the devs need to change it so that Paragon levels would be similar to the dungeons, where it would be every 5 or every 10 levels or something like that. Because seriously, I don't know why some nerd over there thinks that, oh, prime numbers are cool. It's like, no, they're not. Nobody thinks prime numbers are cool. It's stupid and it's unintuitive. But anyways, let's move over here so that I can show you guys all of the stuff retaining to the crystal rings. So in this area, you're going to end up being able to craft your crystal rings and polish them. Now, how do you end up crafting the rings? Well, of course, the ring crafting goes up to level 300 now, and in here you can end up crafting these boxes. However, these boxes are going to end up not only just giving you crystal rings, but you'll notice that there's so many of them because they'll give you crystal rings for that specific class, and they cost very specific resources. So Trovian loops, for example, you get after each Paragon level, whereas a primal loop you get every prime number. There's the prime numbers, and you'll end up getting a prime loop based on the class that you get to a prime Paragon number level, right? I know that that's a mouthful, but whatever. So by basically leveling up my Vanguard and getting prime number Paragon levels, I'll end up getting prime loops, which is then required in order to craft these signatory boxes, which this box will then end up containing a crystal ring of, you know, crystal one ring with hidden effects. It can end up generating at higher tiers, but generally speaking, what's going to happen is you can craft these boxes and then you'll loot collect the rings so that you can then end up getting ring crafters tickets so that you can craft this higher tiered box, which this box in particular, this is the one that'll give us C2 rings or better. So crystal 2 rings. And then if we loot collect the crystal 2 rings, you'll end up getting another resource, the golden ticket, which you can use to craft this box, which gives you a guaranteed C3 ring or better. There's no way to get yourself a guaranteed crystal 4 ring. You just gotta get really lucky. And at any point while you're crafting any of these boxes, you can actually get a gold box really rarely that will end up having a guaranteed crystal 4 ring, which I ended up actually getting a couple of those myself at one point, which was super duper lucky. Now, the big thing that is super duper cool about this, about the crystal rings, is that the boxes themselves are tradable. And then again, of course, as I mentioned, you will end up going to the ring polisher to polish your ring to end up getting your, you know, new ability temporarily. So you can see right here that we can end up using a primal loop, again, prime Paragon numbers, to end up getting this ability, which will end up making it so that we get just additional damage and stuff, or this one that gives us like extra movement. I know my face cam's in the way. We're not really necessarily highlighting these hidden effects. I'm most of all just showing you guys that these are here, and you'll end up having them for a duration of 10 days and then 4 extra days if you end up having Patron active. Patron is going to end up being really, really important because of course there's going to end up being all of these daily bonuses and stuff. You can also end up crafting a bunch of different items with the Trovian loops and Paragon items and junk, and generally speaking, almost every aspect that we've talked about today has some sort of items that you'll end up crafting with new resources, right? So I was actually in the middle of editing the video and then I realized that I didn't even talk about Bomber Royale. So Bomber Royale, if you don't know, is basically going to end up being the replacement of PvP. So we used to actually have deathmatch and capture the flag and stuff, and it was actually a lot of fun. And then Bomber Royale came around because as they ended up tweaking the classes and buffing them and nerfing them and so on and so forth, unfortunately, it did affect how the classes functioned in PvP. And so the devs' way around this was to add a Bomber Royale where it doesn't really matter what class you're using anymore. Basically, you were going to end up spawning into an arena on any of these levels, and essentially you're going to end up facing off against other players, throwing bombs and slowly destroying the arena. But anyways, we've had 3 different seasons of Bomber Royale, and more recently Bomber Royale Season 3 ended up coming out in the game, which did end up adding a few different items, which we're not going to necessarily get into those today. The only one that I did want to mention was the Volatile Bounder. Now this currently, again, is not on console right now, but when the Sunrise update comes out, you guys on console will end up getting the Bomber Royale Season 3 update, the Shadowy Spotlight update, which reworks the Shadow Hunter and all of the classes as mentioned before, and more specifically, the best thing that we end up getting out of Bomber Royale Season 3 is this mount, just because when we left click with it, it does the equivalent of 10-player jumps, and it's actually on a pretty short cooldown, so you can kind of use this at the end game, and it's generally going to end up being one of the best mounts in the entire game, even better than Ganda, just because so many of the end game dungeons are so extremely vertical that rather than mashing spacebar like an idiot, you can usually just end up exploding with this thing and just go up it all at once, which is really, really cool. But that's all we really need to cover with Bomber Season 3, honestly. Another thing to keep in mind is that at spawn points in Worlds, there's going to end up being quest NPCs where you can end up getting quite a bit of XP. There's also going to end up being subclass abilities, which, granted, you know, I'm really pushing the envelope as to, okay, did somebody seriously quit since subclass abilities and they're coming to the game now? But I did want to end up covering that all of this stuff is here. You never know, man. You never know how long somebody's been away from the game. But generally speaking, I think that covers everything. So I hope that you ended up finding this video helpful. If there was anything that I missed, I'm sorry about that. You can leave it in the comments. Someone will probably end up answering. If not, I do. But generally speaking, it's tough for me to end up reading all of the comments. So don't feel burned if I don't end up replying. But essentially, I just wanted to end up having this as a returning guide for players to let you guys know all of the really cool stuff that's going on with this game. Generally speaking, Trove's actually probably at its best it's ever been right now, just because not only is this new endgame area really, really cool, but the fact that they ended up doing such huge amounts of changes to all of the classes so that so many of them are viable. Like, you guys probably are still thinking that the Candy Barb sucks. Candy Barb's actually a powerhouse in the game right now. It ended up happening after the Shadow Hunter update, which again is not on consoles at the moment that I'm recording this video, which hopefully will end up being soon. Anyways, hopefully you found this video helpful. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have a wonderful day, everybody.